Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm thrilled to be sharing my updated bearded dragon care video. Now, it is a little bit warm in this room, so I have a window open. It's far away from the camera, but you might still hear like a car or birds chirping. You also might hear my frogs making their little noises because they're right here. So I apologize if you find that distracting, but I needed some fresh air and I can't really do anything about the frogs. The last bearded dragon care video that I posted was probably in 2018, and it was only like 30 minutes long or so. Get ready for this one to be much longer. And while it is a good care video, my care has changed since then, and I just wanted to update the information. Now, before we get started, I have some disclaimers as well as a couple other things. First of all, I am only one source of care information. I really recommend that you look at other sources as well, not just me, because I can only speak from my own research and my own experiences, but other people are going to have different research and different experiences, so I recommend checking out more than just this care guide. I have been keeping bearded dragons since 2014. I got Franklin September 1st, 2014, and then I got Nova in August of 2018. So I have had two bearded dragons. That's all I've ever had, and I've had them for quite a few years now, so I do feel quite capable of speaking about their care. Another disclaimer, please utilize the description. I'm going to leave timestamps for every subject that I talk about within this care video, whether it be shedding, whether it be diet, whether it be bathing, whether it be supplementation, anything like that. If you're only here for a specific, what you can do is just jump right down into the description, click on the timestamp where I start talking about that subject, and then you're good to go. Because I have all of those listed in the description, I'm not going to be answering any questions that I've already answered in this video. I do want you to feel free to ask questions if I didn't cover something properly, or if you have conflicting information, or if you have a personal experience that you're looking assistance for, that you're seeking assistance for, looking for assistance for, whatever, that you need help with. I'm here to help you, but just don't ask me a question that I've already answered. Another thing I have to add is that I might miss something, and in that case, I will leave it in the description of the video. I am only human, so if I film all this, edit all of this, and then realize, excuse yourself, you forgot something, then I will put it in the description. Another disclaimer is please make sure that bearded dragons are legal to own in your area. And a final disclaimer is that you should have a vet. Okay, no matter if you've already gotten your bearded dragon or if you're just planning on it, make sure you have an exotic vet. A couple more things I want to say are just a little bit of self-promo, such as subscribe, hit that notification bell. Check the links down below for like my merch, for example. This is my tie-dyed merch. I bought it from Teespring and tie-dyed it myself, but it's not a bearded dragon. My bearded dragon was a hoodie, and I cannot with a hoodie in this room right now. It's the middle of June, okay? I'm starting to sweat underneath these bangs already. Oh, you can also check us out on Patreon. You can check us out all over the place, okay? We're on every social, so go ahead and check us out there. But anyways, let's go ahead and get into this very long video. Please don't hesitate to take a break if you need to take a break, get a snack, stand up and stretch, drink some water. It's gonna be a long one. Let's go ahead and get started. There are 8 species of bearded dragons. However, the one that is most commonly kept in captivity, and I'm sure I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation, so I'm also gonna leave it written on the screen. I'm very bad at pronouncing things. I apologize in advance, but Pagona viticeps is what I imagine it's pronounced as. But again, it's on the screen for you. That is the most commonly kept bearded dragon in captivity, and so I'm only speaking about their care in this video. I'm not speaking about the 8 other species, or the 7 other species of the 8. They originate from the arid regions of Australia. You can find tons of pictures of them in the wild. Their lifespan in captivity varies a bit, and I think that this has to do with genetics and also care, because some people will have a bearded dragon that lives for over 10 years. Some people have a bearded dragon that only lives for like 6 or 7 years, but I would say the average is like a 10-year lifespan. Now let's talk about their appearance, because they can look quite a bit different. So there are a number of different morphs, from brown to red, yellow, and even white. They can have a lot of markings or none. There's even different skin types, such as the silkback or the leatherback. They can be anywhere from 14 to 24 inches long. So how to tell if your bearded dragon is a male or a female? It's actually quite easy. If you support your bearded dragon, lift them up, but support their body, because you're going to have to look at them upright. But if you do that and you look at the underside of their legs, males will have very obvious femoral pores and females will not. So here's a picture on the screen of what femoral pores look like on a male and what the absence of them looks like on a female. You might be wondering how old a bearded dragon has to be for it to be able to have those pores. 8 to 12 months is when they reach sexual maturity, so if they're in that age range, then you're good to go to tell if they are male or female. Now let's talk about where you can get a bearded dragon from. So bearded dragons can be found in pet stores, they can be found at expos, they can be found through online breeders or online suppliers. They can be found from through adoption, they can be found through Craigslist, they can be found through Pet Finder. You can find them all kinds of ways. At least where I live, in the United States, they're a really commonly kept reptile. And so as such, you have a lot of options, but unfortunately, not all of those options are good. I personally always advocate for adoption and rescue, or from a situation of rehoming. However, if it's your first bearded dragon, it wouldn't be a bad idea to get one from an ethical breeder. That way you can have some health assurances, that way you're getting an animal that you know isn't going to be in a rescue sort of situation. I mean, as long as you do your research, some breeders produce not such great animals. I don't recommend getting bearded dragons from pet stores because with a pet store bearded dragon, you're going to be supporting the breeding mills that a lot of the animals come from, and that's with chain pet stores. There's going to be some smaller pet stores who don't get their animals from those situations, but the majority of pet stores do. When you get a bearded dragon, or any animal really, from a pet store, that animal has come from a breeder and then is shipped to that store, and a lot of times the breeder that is the one responsible for, breeding that animal or breeding its parents to create that animal, it's a really bad situation. It's not like a small scale breeder or one that really focuses on genetics. They're just looking for quantity more than quality when they're supplying a pet store. Now, if you're interested in getting a quality bearded dragon, one that has, good health, has come from decent lineage, that sort of thing, doesn't have parasites, what you can do is find an ethical breeder online. Now, a good way to do that is to check out Instagram and Facebook for bearded dragon breeders. And then you can ask around in the community, hey, who's a really reputable bearded dragon breeder? Or you can ask people online that you watch, hey, where did you get your bearded dragon from and do you recommend it? Both of my bearded dragons came from situations of rehoming. I found Franklin on Craigslist from someone who was really knowledgeable and really experienced with bearded dragons. He was just looking to get out of keeping bearded dragons. I guess he was moving on to another stage in his life. And as such, he posted Franklin for rehoming when Franklin was 5 or 6 months old on Craigslist. And I was looking for a bearded dragon, so I was perfect. So I reached out to this individual and went and picked up Franklin, and it was a really great experience. He gave me all of his equipment, he gave me the dubia roaches. So if you can find a situation like that, it's not a bad idea. The fact that you're already doing research by watching this video means you've done more than a lot of people who just impulse buy a reptile from a pet store and then later on have to figure out the care. So if you feel comfortable with the idea of getting a bearded dragon from a situation of rehoming, they're out there, they're available. There's tons on Craigslist. You can find them on Pet Finder as well. Pet Finder is great because you can put in your location and it'll show you reptiles for rehoming near you. And a lot of times they come from foster systems, so then there's a vet check or a health check, so you can be assured that the animal you're getting is healthier than if you were just to rescue off of Craigslist. We have a lot of options. Nova also came from a situation of rehoming. Her owner was moving from Chicago to Florida and couldn't keep her reptiles. She was rehoming a bearded dragon, a blue-tongued skink, and a snake. And we saw Nova, and I had been dying to have the morph that Nova is for years, but I wanted to wait for a situation of rehoming, and so when I found her, I was yes, thank you very much. So of course, I jumped on the opportunity to have her, but both my bearded dragons came from Craigslist rehomings. That's just how I did it. That's not the only way to do it. I just want to make that really clear. You have options. I do have a video about how to safely navigate Craigslist, things to look out for, especially when it comes to reptiles, because sometimes people will post pictures online of their reptiles and they are actually in worse condition than when they posted them on Craigslist, false advertising basically. So if you are interested in watching that video, I will include it up here. Now let's talk about cost. So bearded dragons themselves are not costly reptiles unless you're getting higher end morphs or something like that. The cost of bearded dragons is their upkeep, is their initial setup. They are not a cheap reptile. Themselves are a cheap reptile, but their care is not cheap. when you have to factor in UVB bulbs, when you have to factor in how much food they eat, when you have to factor in how big of an enclosure you're going to have to buy, when you have to factor in how much enrichment you need to put in the enclosure, possible vet costs, like they're not a cheap reptile. So I don't want that to deter you, because it's definitely worth having them. I mean, I have 2 of them, you know. If it wasn't worth just having Franklin, I wouldn't have gotten Nova, you know, and I'd still love to have another bearded dragon. That's how much I love them. But because they are such a like financial cost and take up a lot of space, you know, it's a lot. It's not like having something small like a leopard gecko or a crested gecko. A lot of times people lump bearded dragons in as a beginner reptile with leopard geckos and crested geckos. And I completely disagree, because 1, you can really mess up a bearded dragon's care and mess up their health for life. You can do that with any reptile, but with bearded dragons, I think it's easier to do. And 2, they are expensive and they take up a lot of space. And also their poops. Their poops are next level. So if you're not ready for poops, you're not ready for a bearded dragon, but we'll get to poops later. Now let's talk about some bearded dragon morphs that you might want to avoid. I only have 1 written down. That doesn't mean it's the only one ever, it's just the one that I'm aware of, and that would be the silkback bearded dragon. So earlier I had mentioned how there's different morphs for like skin type, and so there's a standard bearded dragon, there's a leatherback, which is like a little bit softer, a little bit less prickly, less scaly, and then there's a silkback. Silkbacks are prone to shedding issues and burning, and considering they are an arid species that like just basks in the sun all day long, it's kind of ridiculous to create a morph that might have issues with being burnt from their own light because they don't have the proper protection. It's like a lot of morphs, when you start to take away from like what they need for their health. It's like, you know, hairless rats and mice, they have health issues. You know, it's just something to keep in mind. If you are interested in getting a silkback, like you're just really drawn to them and you would like to put in the extra effort, make sure you do a lot of research into silkbacks, talk to people with silkback bearded dragons, and also don't buy one from a breeder. Like, how about rescue or rehome? That way you're not monetarily supporting the continuation of breeding silkbacks. If it's something you believe in, again, that is up to you. Like, that's just how I feel about things, and I don't really see people talk about silkies that often, so I felt the need to like advocate for them a bit. Again, if you think it's fine, then it's fine. That's your opinion. Moving on. Now let's get to bearded dragon behavior. I think as far as reptiles are concerned, bearded dragons have amazing behavior. It can take a little bit to build up that trust between you and the bearded dragon. Like, at first they might find you off-putting or scary, especially if you're coming at them from above, or if you don't give them enough enrichment to feel like they can get away from you if they want to. With my experience, Nova and Franklin have just been like top-notch bearded dragons. I've seen people complain about like their bearded dragon isn't really handleable, or like just seems kind of afraid of them or might try to bite them, and I've never had that experience with any bearded dragons, including my own. Now let's talk about some common behaviors that they have that don't really have anything to do with you, but like just behaviors that they exhibit in general. I'm gonna put some footage on the screen here, that way you guys can see the behaviors. If I have them recorded, I might ask some people to see if they have any recordings, or I might have to find some elsewhere, because my bearded dragons, for example, the first behavior is head bobbing. I've never seen my bearded dragons head bob, ever. So number 1, head bobbing. Males head bob more often than females, but females will do it too. It's often a sign of dominance, or it's being done to signal a potential mate. If your beardie always head bobs, it could be that it's stressed. It occurs in new environments or enclosures that are all glass due to reflection. Number 2, waving. It's where they literally move their arm like they're waving like a human. It's a sign of submission or acceptance of a potential mate. Number 3, if your bearded dragon's mouth is open, it's probably to cool off. Bearded dragons will hold their mouths open while basking to help them like regulate their body temperature. But if their mouth is open and their beard is puffed, it could be a threat display. So you'll often notice that like their beard is puffed but also black. If their mouth is constantly open and the enclosure could be too hot, or the bearded dragon could have a respiratory infection. Along the same lines of the beard being puffed out and dark, it could be a threat display, especially if the mouth is open. Bearded dragons also stretch out their beards in a quick movement. It's just like a reflex, they're just doing it to stretch. Number 5, bearded dragons will expand and flatten their bodies. This is referred to as pancaking. Bearded dragons spread out to absorb heat or to make themselves look larger in a threat display. Number 6, sleeping in odd positions. This is something you can find with a lot of reptiles, including leopard geckos. But bearded dragons will sleep in a lot of strange positions. They can sleep upright. It's completely normal as long as you're not noticing anything else wrong with them. Number 7, rubbing on decor. Bearded dragons will often rub on their decor in their enclosure to remove shed. But if you're noticing that the animal isn't shedding or isn't about to shed, it could be that the bearded dragon is itchy due to mites. Number 8, glass surfing. Bearded dragons are bored or stressed in the enclosure and they'll often glass surf to show you that they are. Try giving them more enrichment inside and outside of the enclosure. Number 9, changing color. Bearded dragons appear lighter when they are about to shed and darker when they are cold or stressed. Color change can also occur when exposed to natural sunlight or when they are ill. If they're in sunlight, they'll become darker or more vibrant. If they are ill, they will appear dull. There's tail wiggling, which is often done while hunting or while being really alert. There's also tail whipping, which isn't super common, but it's like a defensive or a leave me alone, and they'll whip you with their tail. Number 11, bearded dragons bask to absorb heat and UVB. Number 12, they also climb. Here's Franklin in his plant, which you wouldn't think he'd be able to climb in, but sure enough, he finds a way, and it's one of his favorite spots. Lucky number 13, bearded dragons eye bulge, and the reason for this is unknown, but there are 3 reasons why they might. If your bearded dragon is trying to get shed off of its face, if your bearded dragon is trying to change its blood pressure, and if your bearded dragon is trying to scratch its eyes. This behavior usually does not occur often, and it usually doesn't occur for very long, so if your bearded dragon is eye bulging for long periods of time or like with high frequency, take them to the vet. There's 2 behaviors I forgot to include. One is that bearded dragons will scratch their head with their back foot like a dog, and it's just when there's like shed or something irritating them. And they will also run, as you see Nova do here in this clip. Nova gets very defensive when she's outside, and I sent Aaron to get her for the first time, and he decided to lift the thing off of her, and that is why she ran into the house. So those are some common bearded dragon behaviors. That's not all the behaviors you'll ever see a bearded dragon do, but those are some common ones that you might have wondered, like, why are they doing that? So now let's talk about handling. So like I said earlier, it can take a bit for them to trust you or for them to like settle into their environment and allow you to start handling them. There's a rule of thumb with reptiles that the first 2 weeks that they're home, you should not like be interfering with their enclosure unless you're like just putting food in or cleaning up a poop. But you shouldn't be interfering with their enclosure. You shouldn't be putting your hands in there and like trying to hold them. You shouldn't be taking them out of the enclosure. The first 2 weeks is a period for them to settle in, and it's really important that you allow them to have that time because it allows them to become adjusted to their new environment, and then once they feel safe, it is better for you to interact with them rather than when they feel unsafe, because you're going to have less success that way. If your bearded dragon is grouchy about being handled, like especially when you first get them, that's unfortunate. A lot of bearded dragons are pretty easy about being handled, but if they're grouchy, it's okay. All you have to do is work with them. I recommend giving them insects or like greens or whatever you're feeding them from your fingers or from tongs. That way they associate you with food and they think. I also recommend that you leave your hand in the enclosure, or you move around in their enclosure, or you talk to them outside their enclosure. You just get them used to your movements and the way you sound and things like that. I also recommend a front opening enclosure. So if you have a top opening enclosure, it might scare your bearded dragon if you're dropping your hand in from above them, because they could be predated on in the wild by birds, and they have this little eye on the top of their head called their parietal or third eye. We'll talk about that in a bit. But when they feel something above them coming down, that triggers them to be like, oh gosh, I'm in danger. So if you're coming at them from above, every single time they might think you are a danger. So I suggest getting an enclosure that opens from the front. That way you can be at their level instead of coming from above them. Now, when it comes to actually handling your bearded dragon, do not pick them up by their legs. Do not pick them up by their tail. Do not pick them up by their head. I recommend scooping them. So what you can do is when they're standing up, you can just slide your hand right under their body, support the whole of their body in your hand, and then you can use your other hand to support their tail, because if they feel unsafe, they're going to start doing this. They're going to flip around, they're going to whip, and they're going to be uncomfortable. And when you're handling your bearded dragon, you want them to be comfortable. So I recommend scooping them up that way. You can also have like if your kid is trying to handle them, or you're not feeling too secure about handling them, like it's a new person, for example, you can have them sit down and you can put the bearded dragon in their lap. That way they don't have to hold them. I do recommend holding bearded dragons close to the ground unless you're like completely comfortable with holding reptiles, because if they do a quick movement, you might drop them, and that would be very unfortunate because it could cause harm to your bearded dragon. So if you're new to holding reptiles, or if you're like engaging with your child or someone who's new to holding reptiles, I really recommend doing it like while sitting down, so that your human feels safe and your bearded dragon feels safe. If your bearded dragon has always been great about handling, but then one day they're not great about handling, it could be that they are going through breeding season and they've just become really grouchy, or they are starting to slow down because they're starting to brumate. We'll get to brumation in a minute. We'll also get to breeding season in a minute. Just hang in there. So let's talk about bearded dragons and their activity cycle during the day. So bearded dragons are a diurnal lizard. They sleep at night and they're awake during the day, just like we are. So it's actually really great for you to be able to interact with them, like compared to other reptiles, because you'll be able to do it in your waking period. One thing I want to say is that it's very, very important to have your bearded dragon on a schedule. They rely on this schedule. This lighting period and heat period is important. So we'll get to the type of light that you'll need to offer in a minute, but because they are a diurnal species and they depend on, the lights coming on in the morning, the enclosure heating up throughout the morning, to tell them, okay, it's morning, it's time for me to wake up. Their body kicks on, like their digestion starts to tell them they're hungry. Like, it's really important for them to have that set daily schedule. Just as important as it is for them to wake up in the morning, it's important for their lights to go off at night and for them to have darkness and for them to be able to cool down and go to sleep. Now, throughout the year, this is going to look different. So in the summertime, like we're in right now, they have the longest light period of the year, and in the winter, they'll have the shortest light period of the year. So right now, their lights are on for 13 to 14 hours a day, and then the rest of the hours in a 24-hour cycle, they're off. It'll be like 10 hours at night, their lights are off, and then the rest of the hours, which would be 14, they're on. So in the winter, it's the reverse. In the winter, you're going to have like 10 or 11 hours of light, and then you're going to have a longer period of darkness. Now, this is going to switch up throughout the year. So like in the summertime, you'll have 14. In fall, you'll have like 13 or 12. In winter, you'll have like 11 or 10, and then as spring starts to kick back up, you'll start to go back up again. So you'll have like 12 or 13 as you're beginning into summer. So just adjust the lights with your schedules. So if you are having longer daytime periods, adjust your bearded dragon's light so they're having longer daytime periods. If you are having shorter daytime periods, adjust your bearded dragon's light so it's having shorter daytime periods. The way that you can control the amount of light that your bearded dragon gets is to use a timer. I have an Amazon affiliate shop down below that I have the timers that I use in, so if you're interested in checking them out, be sure to click on that link. I currently use this like really big surge protector that has a timer side and an untimed side, so I just plug in all the lights that I need on the timer side, and it's really great instead of having like big blocky timers. But if you only have one enclosure, the blocky timer is going to work just fine for you. Now let's talk about their activity cycle during the year. So bearded dragons are going to be active in spring and summer, they're going to be active in fall, but then when winter comes around, they might brumate. That's just an unfortunate part of keeping reptiles. Both of my bearded dragons have brumated, and I wouldn't say they do it every year. Like Franklin brumated for like a really short period, 2020 into 2021, and Nova brumated harder in 2019 into 2020 than she did in 2020 into 2021. But it's going to be just a matter of preference for your bearded dragon. If the temperatures in your house drop, which they most likely will because the temperatures outside have dropped, and because you're changing the amount of light they have throughout the day, it may cause them to brumate. And don't worry, brumation is okay. Brumation is not something to be afraid of. It is your bearded dragon's instinctive habit to say, oh God, it's getting darker, it's getting colder, resources are going to be scarce, I'm going to rely on the fat that I have stored up, the nutrients that I've stored up all throughout this year, and just kick it. We're just gonna chill. We're gonna ride the winter out. That's pretty much how it works for bearded dragons and for a lot of reptiles who decide to brumate. It's just a period of conserving energy for them so they don't expend a lot of energy looking for resources like food that may not be very available because it's winter. So brumation can last anywhere from a few days to a few weeks or even a few months. It really just depends on your individual bearded dragon. I'll talk about some things to look for later in this video that are signs of illness, but if you're noticing that nothing is wrong with your bearded dragon and it just brumates, then it's probably just brumation. It's not a bad idea to take your reptile to the vet before they brumate. That way you can get a proper like health checkup and you feel safe knowing that if your bearded dragon goes down for 2 months, it's gonna be okay. I don't recommend waking your bearded dragon up to feed them or anything like that. You have to trust them. You have to let them figure out what they're doing on their own. Bearded dragons who wake up from brumation on their own may want to eat, and that's fine. If you wake yours and you feed it, what's going to happen is it's going to go back to sleep, and that undigested food is going to be really nasty in their body, so I don't recommend that at all. It can make them quite sick. If you notice that your bearded dragon only brumated for a couple days or a couple weeks, and then it's up, and then it goes back down, and then it wakes up again, that's okay. That's what Franklin does. He just kind of like brumates, and then he wakes up and he's like, oh my gosh, is winter over yet? And when it's not, he's like, good night, and goes right back to sleep. So it's okay. All bearded dragons are different. Yours is going to behave differently than the next person's. It's okay. I also want to address that for bearded dragons, brumation's gonna look different. Like, some of them will actually just hardcore sleep. Like, they will have their eyes closed, they will be dull in color, they'll be like buried somewhere in a hide. Others will be awake, but they'll just move around a lot less, they'll reject food, they'll just be more chill. So again, your bearded dragon could go either way. Now, in addition to brumation, there's another period of the year where you have to keep an eye on their behavior, and that would be breeding season, which occurs in the spring after brumation. So breeding season, you can notice like females may start to dig, they may start to get really agitated, they might lose weight or produce eggs. We'll get to that at the end of the video. And don't worry, we'll talk about reproduction at the end of the video. But male bearded dragons may become agitated, like looking for a mate. They might just become like a little bit aggressive or more active. I have never personally experienced either of my bearded dragons having changes during breeding season. Nova has never laid eggs, thankfully. Franklin has never become aggressive during breeding season or anything like that, but it's very common. So just because I haven't experienced it doesn't mean that you won't. Now let's talk about enclosure and habitat. So a bearded dragon is going to need way more space than a pet store or many online sites will tell you that they need. Oh, my frog just pooped. Just saw it like sink to the bottom. Anyways, when I first started keeping bearded dragons back in 2014 when I got Franklin, the recommended size was a 40-gallon breeder, and in a lot of places it still is, which I think is absurd. I never kept Franklin in a 40-gallon. He was never in anything smaller than a 75-gallon, not even when he was 6 months old. He currently lives in a 4x2x2 Zen Habitats enclosure, which I believe is a 120-gallon equivalent. I've seen bearded dragons kept in a lot of different sizes of enclosures. I've seen people keep them in 6 or 8 foot vivariums. I've seen people keep them in 20 gallons. I've seen people keep them in 40 gallons. I've seen people keep them in 75s. I've seen people keep them around 90 or 100 gallons. I mean, I've seen them kept all kinds of ways, you know. It's going to be up to you to choose what you want to have. I think that with a 40-gallon or a 20-gallon, one, it's too small for them, for their body. Like, it's too small for them to move around in comfortably. It's too small for them to have proper enrichment. It's too small for them to have proper temperature gradient. So like, we'll get to that in a bit, like temperature and how to heat them and stuff. But if you choose an enclosure that's smaller rather than larger, you're going to have trouble creating a proper basking spot and temperature gradient throughout the enclosure. So I really recommend choosing an enclosure that is 4 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet or larger. If you already have something smaller, but it's like 80, 90, 100 gallons, you're probably fine. I think anything above like a 75 is a decent size for a bearded dragon, as long as you are still able to give it proper temperature gradient and proper enrichment. Now, if you have like a special needs bearded dragon, like it has metabolic bone disease, muscular dystrophy, if it has any sort of disability, it was born without a limb, or it's lost a limb because it was bitten off by a sibling when they were young, like, if it has any of those issues, then yeah, a 120-gallon enclosure is probably going to be a challenge for it to properly move around in. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to keep in something smaller. However, I think that for the majority of bearded dragons, you can go on the larger side rather than the smaller side. The thing about providing a proper sized enclosure for a bearded dragon is that it can be a challenge. There's not a lot of enclosures available on the market that are big enough to meet the needs of a bearded dragon. So when you go to a pet store, you're going to be stuck with an aquarium. So your best bet, if you want an aquarium, that's fine, but it's not front opening, so I don't recommend it. And also they can be kind of unsightly, but they're fine if you get an aquarium. That's a completely suitable housing. Like I said, Franklin was in an aquarium for the first couple years that I had him. However, if you want something that is a bit more attractive, or if you want something that's front opening, you might have to have an enclosure built for you through a lot of different people in the reptile community build enclosures, and you could ask one of them. You can get one through a pre-made enclosure company, like for example Zen Habitats. They make all the pieces for an enclosure, they send it to you, and then you assemble it at your house. In fact, Zen Habitats is what I'm using for my enclosures. I have an affiliate link with them down below, so if you're interested in checking them out and you use my link, I will make a small commission, but it is at no extra cost to you. What I like about Zen Habitats enclosures is that they're spacious, they're easy to assemble, and a lot of reptile enclosures come in black or white. There's no in between. You get PVC, that's black or white. That's pretty much what you get, at least in America. So I like that Zen Habitats has the bamboo printed panels because it makes the enclosure look nicer. Like it has warm yellow and brown tones in it. And so a lot of the enclosure's decor, which is like wood and substrate and rock, is going to blend in better with that background. Bearded dragons can be kept in the PVC or the wood enclosure. I do recommend PVC if like you are planning to have a more humid species in that type of enclosure. However, because a bearded dragon has a pretty dry enclosure, pretty arid type of setup, a wood enclosure is just fine. The only real difference between them is like one's $50 more than the other, so it's not like too much of a difference in cost. If you want to go with something that's going to be like more durable over time, the PVC is probably the better option. However, I have mine in wood enclosures and I've had them for over a year and they're holding up just fine. And I use substrate and I use rocks and all type of heavy materials, and they're holding up just fine. Another one of my favorite enclosures is by Custom Reptile Habitats. They have these like really durable enclosures that also they send to you and you can assemble them, but you can get them in 6 feet, you know, like really big enclosures. They also sell backgrounds and things that can make the enclosure look really naturalistic. So if you want to check out them, I will leave a link to them down below as well. It's also an affiliate link, but I love the backgrounds. So if you want to have like a zoo looking type of enclosure, that's the way to go. Regardless of what you go with, you should get a front opening enclosure that's made out of wood or PVC that is like 4 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet minimum, or a little bit larger. Again, if you want to go with an aquarium that is a completely fine route, just keep in mind that you will not be able to interact with them from the front. You'll have to interact with them from the top, and that may cause you some issues. Another thing that you're going to want to make sure the enclosure has is adequate ventilation, or you want to make sure it's well equipped to have the heating that you're planning to use. Also, you can build your own enclosure. You can literally find the measurements that you want in hardware store wood and build it yourself. There's probably tons of tutorials online of how to build your own enclosure. That's if you're feeling up to it, you know? I don't feel up to building my own enclosure, so that's why I always buy mine. But you want to make sure that the enclosure has adequate ventilation, because if the enclosure is too closed off, it might trap too much heat, and also it might be too humid. And so bearded dragons as an arid species shouldn't have too high of humidity. That's just something to keep in mind. You do want there to be like a screen top or ventilation on the sides or something like that. Another thing you want to look out for is for the sides of the enclosure to be blocked out. So if you have a glass enclosure, you want to make sure that you do the back and the sides covered. That way your bearded dragon doesn't get upset by its own reflection all day long, because it'll think it's another bearded dragon and it will like have its beard puffed out and it'll try to like fight itself. It's not a good time. So make sure that you keep their stress low and cover the sides and the background. The good thing about a Zen Habitats enclosure or a PVC enclosure, a Custom Reptile Habitats enclosure, a wood enclosure, whatever, is that they all aren't glass except on the front. So your bearded dragon won't be able to see themselves, so they feel nice and safe. Enrichment can be offered in the form of large rocks. It can be offered in the form of small rocks, not like gravel, but like, you know, small decorative rocks or slate tile. It can be offered in the form of driftwood, or cork. It can be offered in the form of like store-bought basking platforms and caves, which are completely fine too. You can offer hammocks, you can offer ledges, like magnetic ones or ones that like glue to the side of the enclosure. Anything that's going to give them the ability to climb and engage with their enclosure. As long as it's safe for reptiles, you should be good to go. Just make sure that whatever you're using sits flat on the ground and doesn't wobble around a lot, or isn't like so lightweight that your beardie can topple it over. You also don't want something really heavy that's like not stable, because if it falls on them it could hurt them. You don't want something that is like sharp or jagged, unless it's like jagged in a way like a rock is, and then they can like rub against it for their shed or to like trim their nails on. But you don't want something that has like sharp edges. Like sometimes when you buy caves or decor from a store, it'll have those really sharp edges. You can sand those down, so just be sure to look for that when you're buying those from a store. Now let's talk about heating and lighting, which is arguably the most important aspect of caring for a bearded dragon. So there's a lot of different options. I'm not here to tell you what is the right option, what's the wrong option. I'm just going to tell you what I use and what I've used in the past and what other people have used with success. So first and foremost, bearded dragons need heat from above, not below. That is one thing that like pretty universally people agree with when it comes to bearded dragon care. If you're offering heat from below, it can burn them. It also isn't going to help them regulate their body temperature or like their day-night cycle. Like I mentioned earlier, bearded dragons have the parietal eye on top of their head. It's also sometimes called a third eye, and it helps them to regulate their body temperature. It helps them to detect the light and heat that's above them. And so if you are using heat from below, they obviously cannot use that sensory organ that is there for a reason. So you're going to want to use a heat bulb rather than an under tank heater or like a heat rock or anything that's going to heat from below. So a heat bulb that you can offer will be like a halogen or some sort of basking lamp or a deep heat projector, anything that's going to put off heat from above and create a basking spot. I personally use halogens right now because they put out a really powerful basking spot and create like decent ambient temperatures throughout the enclosure. I in the past used a mercury vapor bulb, which also puts out UVB. I recommend using those only in really large elaborate setups. A lot of times bearded dragons in captivity are offered a mercury vapor bulb, but it's in small enclosures or enclosures that aren't really tall, and this can be harmful to your bearded dragon because it puts out a lot of UVB. I used the mercury vapor bulb for years with my bearded dragon Franklin, and I never had any issues with him. However, I used a mercury vapor bulb with Nova and she was not a fan of it. She has much better behavior being in an enclosure with a halogen and a linear UVB rather than a mercury vapor bulb. You are still safe to use those if you follow the guidelines for them and if you choose a high quality mercury vapor bulb. I was using the Mega Ray one, so if you are going to use one, use a high quality one and follow the directions for it. Make sure you have plenty of distance in between that basking lamp and your bearded dragon. Just follow the rules that go along with using a bulb like that. There's some discrepancy online about the basking spot that you should be offering. Some people say as low as 90, some people say as high as 115. I'm gonna say 90 is too low, 115 is too high. I'm gonna say 105 to 110 is the ideal range of a basking spot for your bearded dragon. It's a good thing if you use a halogen, for example, because they are a really powerful beam that creates that basking spot without you having to have it super close to the light. So while the basking spot needs to be 105, there is a temperature gradient that you need to maintain throughout the whole enclosure. So the basking spot is only one element of their heating that you need to achieve. You also need to achieve an ambient temperature that's in the 80s. So basically you want their hot spot to be on one end of the enclosure, and then as the bearded dragon gets away from the heat bulb all the way to the cool end of their enclosure should be a gradient. It should be in the 90s, then the 80s, and then should get down as low as like 75. So the cool end should be in like the high 70s. This area should be around the 80s and high 80s, and then you've got, you know, the 90s, and then you've got your basking spot. You want to create the ability for your bearded dragon to say, oh no, I'm too cold, I need to be over here. Oh no, I'm too hot, I need to be over here. They need to be able to move around. If they're getting too much heat, it's going to be bad for them. If they're not getting enough heat, it's going to be bad for them. So you need to give them the option of choosing. Thermoregulation is very important for bearded dragons. Now, your nighttime temperatures can fall to the high 60s, so if you're having any issue maintaining temperatures above like 67, 68 at night, then what you can do is get a deep heat projector or a ceramic heat emitter to heat up the enclosure a bit at night. Keep in mind, you do not want it to be as warm as during the day because you still have to have a temperature drop at night. You also have to choose a heat source for nighttime that produces no visible light. A ceramic heat emitter and a deep heat projector do not put off light, so just make sure that you follow those rules if you are having trouble heating up your bearded dragon's enclosure at nighttime. I live in Indiana and I just don't use any heat with them at night whatsoever. Never have in all the years I've had them, and that has been okay. Our house temperature downstairs stays in the high 60s, so it never really is a problem. If there's a couple of nights that are a little bit cooler, that's okay. You just don't want it to be a consistent thing. Let's talk about UVB. UVB is like super important for bearded dragons. I can't stress enough how important it is that you get their UVB right. So there's a lot of different options out there. I'm going to tell you some ones that you should avoid. You should avoid coil UVBs. They put out an inaccurate amount of UVB. They're also like prone to like burning out really quickly or then randomly bursting with UVB. Like I've seen some studies about the coil UVBs and how unreliable they are with the amount of UVB they offer, so I don't recommend those. I also don't recommend just taking your bearded dragon outside for UVB unless like you live in Australia and you can offer them like an outdoor enclosure. You need to have UVB inside their enclosure, inside your house. Putting them next to your window isn't going to count. Putting them outside isn't going to count. They need to have UVB in their enclosure so that they can choose to absorb that when they'd like to. Now, the UVB should be offered on 1/2 to 3/4 of your enclosure. It should not be the full length of your enclosure because your bearded dragon should have a little shade range, so if they want to get away from the UVB, that they can. A good resource to use when trying to determine what type of UVB bulb to go for is the Arcadia lighting guide. I actually referenced this in my leopard gecko care video, but essentially you type in the species that you have into their like little search bar and it'll bring up all the different light bulbs that you can use and the distances that they need to be used for in your enclosure. I also discuss how much UVB will be blocked out by a mesh top. They show you how it should be used. Like, it's a really useful guide for someone who's not used to offering UVB to their reptiles. I personally use Arcadia UVB for my bearded dragons, and I know it's working because Franklin had to have an x-ray like 2 months ago. He had a number of x-rays, probably like 12 x-rays done. So yeah, he had really gorgeous bones on the x-ray. So I know that his UVB and calcium intake are good. I'll talk more about why Franklin had to have so many x-rays later in the health section. I use the Arcadia T5HO 12% bulb that is mounted on the inside of the enclosure at the very top. Again, everyone's enclosure is going to look different. If you're putting the light over mesh, you're going to want to get a stronger light because the mesh is going to block out some of the UVB. Make sure that you're getting a bulb that is suitable for your enclosure. So if your enclosure is 24 inches tall and you have a basking spot that's like, I don't know, 18 inches away from the bulb, make sure you choose a bulb that is going to offer the optimal output for your bearded dragon at 18 inches. Again, that Arcadia lighting guide will be able to help you with that. Like I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to use a timer with your bulbs. I have the timers that I use in my Amazon affiliate shop. Like I said, it's down below. But just make sure you're using a timer because the UVB should not be on 24/7. It should only be on when it's daytime. One more thing I want to say is that when you are using a heat bulb or any heat source, actually for any reptile when you're using a heat source, you'll need a thermostat. I recommend using a dimming thermostat with a heat lamp. It's very simple. There's a probe attached to a thermostat. You put the probe where your bearded dragon's basking spot is. You set the temperature that you want, so 105 to 110, just pick 107 for example, and then it'll make sure that your heat bulb stays in that range so it doesn't get too hot, it doesn't get too cold. If you're using a thermostat and you're not being able to achieve the proper temperatures, it's probably not the thermostat's fault, it's probably the fact that your bulb is too low wattage, so you'll have to get a new bulb. To measure temperature, I recommend using an infrared thermometer as well as a digital hygrometer and thermometer. So you can use a hygrometer thermometer if you want, it just puts the humidity and temperature into one, but you can also just use a plain thermometer that doesn't have a hygrometer. It just makes sense to get one that has both. But you'll need an infrared thermometer, which is a temperature gun, which basically allows you to tell the temperature of any area that you point the laser at. It's super great for testing out basking spots. And then the digital hygrometer thermometer is great because it helps you to understand the ambient temperatures and the ambient humidity. So now let's talk about bearded dragons and humidity. So bearded dragons do not require high humidity as they come from an arid region, which is like, you know, more dry than like a temperate or rainforest type of region. You do not want to be spraying down their enclosure every day. You don't want to be moistening substrate every day. You don't want to have like a really large water dish in their enclosure or a really elaborate water section of their enclosure. They are not going to vibe with the humidity that creates. Like I was mentioning earlier, you can have a digital thermometer hygrometer that will tell you the ambient humidity of your bearded dragon's enclosure. Keep in mind the humidity is going to go down at daytime and up at nighttime because of the lack of the heat. That is natural and that's okay, but your daytime ambient humidity should be around like 30 to 40%. It shouldn't be super high. Like you don't want it as high as 50. That's too high. If you're having trouble maintaining proper humidity in your enclosure, I recommend increasing or decreasing ventilation. So if you need less humidity, you are going to want to increase ventilation. If you want more humidity, you're going to decrease ventilation. If you are having issues with it and you have substrate, you might want to try keeping the substrate more dry or using less substrate. If you're having issues with humidity, it could also just be your household humidity or the outside humidity. Sometimes when it rains here, the interior of the house has humidity that spikes, and that's okay. It's as long as it's not like a constant thing, like your bearded dragon is always humid, then it should be fine. They can handle little spikes, you know, they're okay, but you shouldn't have a humidity that's consistently too high. Now it's time for the age-old substrate debate, which I have been on both sides of this issue. Like back in the day, I would say no substrate for bearded dragons, you know, they'll die of impaction. But nowadays I'm like, why do I offer substrate to a bunch of my other species if I'm also not going to offer it to my bearded dragon? Like, why does it make sense to give my fire skink, my red-egg crocodile skink, my African fat-tail geckos, my crested geckos, like why can they have substrate but my leopard geckos and bearded dragons can't? Where's the logic? Before we actually dive into this, I'm going to say it's up to you. If you want to use loose substrate, great. If you want to use non-loose substrate, great. As long as you're making an informed decision for you and your bearded dragon about what you're choosing, I'm happy. That's all I care about. So I'm going to offer some pros and cons to different substrates, loose and non-loose, and you can make your decision on your own, and there's no judgment either way. Okay? Okay. Let's get started. So the argument for using substrate is that it's more enriching, it's more naturalistic, it allows them to dig, it allows them to lay eggs, it allows them to engage in more of their natural behaviors. The argument against the loose substrate is that it can be hard to clean due to bearded dragons just being like absolute poop monsters. They have nasty poops. And also because they may ingest it and become impacted. Another issue I often see people talk about with substrate is that it may clog bearded dragon femoral pores. Let's go ahead and talk about the various substrate options there are. So if you want to use a non-loose substrate, you can use tile. That's probably my favorite non-loose substrate option. It holds heat well, it's easy to clean, it's not ugly to look at like paper towel or newspaper, and it also allows your bearded dragons to trim their nails on it. So ceramic tile, that's an option for you. You can use paper towel, you can use newspaper, you can use kitchen cabinet liner, you can use all those flat substrates. However, if you're gonna go with a non-loose, I really do recommend tile. There's also some that I don't recommend. That would be reptile carpet. Reptile carpet is really hard to clean. I can't even imagine trying to clean bearded dragon poop out of it. The smell. Also, their nails and their teeth may get caught on the fibers of the reptile carpet, so I don't recommend it for that reason. There are some loose substrate options that I see regularly used that are good and some that are bad. So I'm going to go through the good first. What I personally use is Josh's Frog's Bio-Arid, and before this I was using a blend of organic topsoil and washed play sand that I made myself. But that's what I was using before, and then Josh's Frogs came out with their substrate and I wanted to give it a try and I really liked it, so that's what I'm using right now. So you can also try the Terra Sahara by the Bio Dude. That is their arid substrate. I wasn't a big fan of it personally, but other people have used it with great success, so you should definitely look into trying it. You can try Arcadia Earth Mix Arid, which I know is used for leopard geckos. I'm sure it's also safe for bearded dragons due to the fact that it is an arid substrate. However, I don't have access to Arcadia Earth Mix Arid, so I've never been able to try it, so I can't say if it's any good. My friends all like it though, so I imagine it's good. But I just can't try it, so I'm sorry, I cannot recommend it. It looks good though. I would like to try it one day. I also see people using just plain sand, and while I don't think it's as bad as using like a calcium sand, it's also not as appropriate as using topsoil mixed with sand. There's also people who use a colored sand that they buy from the store, like purple or green or yellow. I don't recommend this whatsoever because a lot of times the bearded dragon will get dyed the color of the sand, which is just not great. I've seen people keep their bearded dragons on EcoEarth. I really don't recommend EcoEarth. I don't know why everyone is so in love with using EcoEarth as a substrate. It's not even a real soil. It is crushed coconut fibers. Like, it's not soil. Oh, I can't even tell you. I have a video about why I don't like EcoEarth. I'll include it up here. I like EcoEarth for some things, right? Like using it in humid hides or in lay boxes or mixing it with organic topsoil. I do not like using it as just a baseline substrate, especially for arid species, because when you have it a little bit moistened, it molds like instantaneously. It molds so fast. When you have it really dry, it's super light and dusty and kicks up really easily. It's just not an appropriate substrate, especially not for a bearded dragon. They don't live on crushed coconut fiber in the wild. That's one of my favorite things when people are like, EcoEarth is naturalistic, and like, how? Anyways, that's my 2 cents about EcoEarth. So as a substrate, like all on its own, for bearded dragons, I do not recommend it. Now, if you're gonna use it in like, no, I wouldn't even use it in a lay box. I would use like vermiculite or sand and soil mixed. No, I wouldn't even use it in a bearded dragon lay box. Next, another substrate option that's not so great is calcium sand, and that's because of its high calcium content and the fact that it's just sand. And then I also don't recommend crushed walnut shell. Again, how is that naturalistic? It's walnut. Moving on. The thing about using substrate is that bearded dragon poops are like vile. They're huge, they're stinky, there's a lot of moisture that comes with them. Ugh, they're nasty. So if you plan to use substrate, be prepared to do daily spot cleanings, and you'll want to pick up not just the poop, but the substrate under the poop that has absorbed the wetness of the poop. Be prepared to do substrate changes like probably at least once a year if you're spot cleaning. If you're not spot cleaning, oh god, you'll probably have to do it like once a month. If your bearded dragon regularly poops in the same place every time, what you can do is put something there that they'll poop on that's easy to wash off. Like you can put a little rock or a tile or something like that there that's easy to rinse off and put back in the enclosure. That way you can save yourself the trouble of having to replace all the substrate or lift out a bunch of it underneath the poop. Another thing to keep in mind about substrate is that bearded dragons have a Jacobson organ. You'll see them using it basically when they're using their tongue to explore the environment. So they'll kind of just like stick their tongue out a little bit and then pull their head back. It's not like when they're going to eat, right? Their mouth isn't like really open, their tongue isn't really stuck out. It's just a little bit, and it's just them exploring their environment. They'll often do this, like they'll walk a few steps, stick their tongue out and explore something, and then walk a few steps and do it again. So because of that Jacobson organ, and because bearded dragons like may hunt in their enclosure, the issue of impaction is something that we have to talk about. So impaction is going to be more of a risk if your husbandry is incorrect. So if you are offering an enclosure that has the incorrect substrate, if you're offering insects that have a really dense exoskeleton, really fibrous exoskeleton, if you're offering temperatures that are too cold, like if you're offering a dirty enclosure, all of these things are going to lead more towards impaction than having loose substrate with a proper environment and a proper diet. It's just something to keep in mind that when you see impacted bearded dragons or leopard geckos or any reptiles in general, it typically comes from not the fact that you're offering a loose substrate, but the fact that something about your husbandry is incorrect. Now, that's not going to be the case for everyone. You might just have a really derpy bearded dragon who loves shoveling substrate into its mouth. Like, that's quite possible. I do just want to put you at ease a bit and say that my bearded dragons have been on substrate for over a year now and there's been no issues. I've used 2 different kinds of substrate for them. One of my bearded dragons, Franklin, he's very explorative with his Jacobson organ and he does not have any issues with impaction or taking in large amounts of substrate at a time. So while I do respect that it's a concern, I want to say that it's probably more likely going to be from other aspects of your husbandry rather than just offering substrate. Now let's talk about cohabitation. In absolutely no way should you be cohabbing bearded dragons. That's just how I feel about that. It's super dangerous to cohab bearded dragons. I've seen really horrific situations like photographs from a vet where a bearded dragon had part of its face ripped off just by being housed with another bearded dragon that it had been with for years, and then one day it just decided no longer and tore the other one to bits. Like, it's really not safe. It's really not necessary. If you want to have two bearded dragons, just have two separate enclosures. If you think that they need company, no they don't. You're anthropomorphizing them. I think that's the word. Anthropomorphizing? I might be saying it wrong. But basically, you're putting human emotions and human feelings onto the bearded dragon. They don't get lonely like that. They don't need interaction with their own species like humans do, right? They're reptiles. Reptiles don't really have the same amount of like social needs that a mammal does. So just, they're not going to get lonely. They're completely fine living on their own, okay? Solitude is good for them. Maybe I'm a bearded dragon. So I'm not sure if you have the urge to keep yours together or not, but if you do, I'm encouraging you not to. And if you already have yours housed together, I recommend separating them. Even people who breed them will just put them together to have them breed and then they'll separate them again. So I really do not recommend keeping them together. Along the lines of cohabitation, I don't recommend cohabiting them with any other species. I also don't recommend allowing them to interact regularly with dogs, cats, birds. I don't know why all of a sudden we're seeing such a surge in like popularity online with like unlikely friendships. It might be because of the dodo, but it's really harmful to promote the idea that a bearded dragon can be friends with a cat or a bird or a dog. A cat could kill a bearded dragon, a dog could kill a bearded dragon, a bird could kill a bearded dragon. A bearded dragon could cause harm to any of them, although it's likely going to be the other way around. It's just really not a safe thing to do, and absolutely never let them interact when you're not literally right in between them. Like, I don't understand why it's become popular on the internet. I guess because people don't know, but I'm here to tell you, you should not regularly let your bearded dragon interact with other species. Alright, let's talk about nutrition, another very important aspect of bearded dragon husbandry. So, the nutrition for a juvenile bearded dragon is going to be different for an adult bearded dragon. The nutrition for a bearded dragon is going to be different depending on its age. So there's this thing called the 80-20 rule, and it can be reversed. So like as a juvenile, it's 80% protein, 20% greens. As an adult, it's 20% protein, 80% greens. The reason that's in place is because the bearded dragons need more protein as they're growing than when they're an adult. This can also be the case if you have a bearded dragon that's laying eggs. She'll need to eat more protein, but other than that, you can just keep her with the 80-20 rule. So bearded dragons are omnivores. They eat plants and insects, like I was just saying. Adult bearded dragons are going to be eating more greens, and juveniles are going to be eating less greens. However, you should still offer your juveniles greens. One mistake I see when people raise bearded dragons is they offer a lot of protein to their babies and not enough greens, and then when they start to reach adulthood and you have to like wean them off of as much protein, they just won't eat their greens. Not good, not good. If you start them out young, you'll have an easier time transitioning them to a mostly green diet when they're adults. In adults, if you offer too much protein, it can lead to obesity, so that's not something that we want. We don't want obese bearded dragons. Obese bearded dragons are, I almost feel like they're inevitable. At some point in time, your bearded dragon's going to be on the chunky side. That's okay. You can rectify that situation. But there's tons and tons of bearded dragons in like popular media, like social media or YouTube or whatever, TikTok especially. Oh my god, don't get me started on TikTok. But there's tons of unhealthy, overweight bearded dragons that are advertised online. And so people might look at an overweight bearded dragon and think that is what they should be going for. I'm here to tell you, you do not want an overweight bearded dragon. It's just going to cause your bearded dragon health issues, which is going to cause you stress, worry, and money down the road when you have to take them to the vet for, liver problems. So I really don't recommend it. I know it can be fun to feed your bearded dragon proteins because they have a phenomenal response to insects. However, please just keep in mind that their obesity is right around the corner for them, okay? Like, it can happen very easily. So let's talk about acceptable insects to offer. This would include both adult and young bearded dragons. You can offer dubia roaches, you can offer crickets, you can offer locusts, you can offer mealworms, you can offer superworms, you can offer hornworms, you can offer silkworms, you can offer waxworms. Now, all of those are not made equal. The best insect on the market for bearded dragons is dubia roaches. They have a pretty decent phosphorus to calcium ratio, which we'll get to in a minute. They have a pretty good amount of protein compared to fat. Like, they are just a really healthy feeder insect. A lot of other feeder insects are going to be too fatty, namely superworms and waxworms, or they'll be too hard of an exoskeleton and therefore they might be hard to digest. That'd be mealworms. or they might lack protein and have too much moisture, but they'll have a nice amount of calcium, so it's a benefit. That would include hornworms and I believe silkworms. I'm not like an expert on silkworms, but I think that they have a similar nutrition analysis to hornworms. Now there's one insect that's called black soldier fly larvae that has a really good calcium output, and a lot of people love giving it to their bearded dragons. I've never given my black soldier fly larvae. I would like to in the future, but I can't say much about it because I've never done it before. When it comes to crickets and locusts, I don't feed either, so I can't say if they're like really great or not great. I will say I don't like crickets because they're stinky, they escape very easily. They're just not my thing. Crickets are also known to carry pinworm, especially if you get them from a pet store, so just not a vibe for me. Also, it might take like a lot of crickets to feed to your bearded dragon to be an actual meal, especially when they're juveniles, so it's just, that's too much work for me. I don't like crickets. Not happening. I offer my adult bearded dragons dubia roaches once a week. They will get my male dubia roaches because I have a colony in this closet that you can't see, and there's a lot of males, you know, a lot of grown-ups, and when there's a lot of grown-up males, it's kind of unnecessary because you don't need that many males to impregnate the female roaches, so they can be kind of rowdy if there's too many of them, so I just make sure that there aren't by feeding them to my bearded dragons. So once a week I will take out the full-grown ones that are males and I'll dust them in calcium, feed them to the beardies. The beardies love them. They absolutely go crazy for the dubia roaches, and when Franklin was a juvenile and when Nova was a juvenile, they were given dubia roaches as well. They were just smaller ones. About once a month, I'll give my bearded dragons hornworms as a treat because hornworms are very rich in calcium and moisture. They're not high in protein, so you can't use them as part of a staple diet, like you can't use them as a staple insect. But I will give them to them once a month because they're just like a lovely, like juicy, calcium-filled treat that my bearded dragons love. So a few times a year, I will give my bearded dragons superworms. Keep in mind, because I'm only offering my adult bearded dragons insects once a week, I won't be offering them superworms like every other feeding or once a month even, because it'd be too frequent. They'd have too many of them, and like I said, they're prone to obesity, bearded dragons. So if you're offering 4 meals of protein in a month and one of those meals has become a fatty meal, it's just like gonna be too many throughout the year that are fatty, if that makes sense. So just a few times a year I'll give them superworms. It's not very often. I never feed my bearded dragons mealworms because that would just be like defeating the purpose. Like, they're so little, I'd have to give so many to be a proper meal. Also, I'm not all about giving them mealworms because of that hard exoskeleton. I'm also not giving them waxworms because they're super fatty and they're really small, so I'd have to give a lot of them and it would just be too much fat. The kind of insects that you should be offering to your bearded dragon need to be live and not like frozen or canned. Like, some people will say it's okay to feed canned or frozen, and I personally don't think so. I think live is more enriching. I also think live is better because you can offer like a gut-loaded insect. So gut loading is the process by which an insect is fed nutritious foods 24 hours before you offer the insect to your bearded dragon or your reptile. That way your reptile is getting all the nutrients from those foods that's in the roach, if that makes sense, or the insect. You should absolutely 100% gut load insects that you feed to anything. You can offer leafy greens, you can offer vegetables, you can offer fruits to your insects to make sure that they are offering nutrients to your bearded dragon. I regularly feed my dubia roaches carrots. I give them the leafy green stems that my bearded dragons don't eat. I give them banana, I'll give them orange, I'll give them squash, bell pepper, broccoli, those type of things. I also don't recommend giving your bearded dragon insects that you catch outside. You don't know where it's been, so you don't know if it has parasites or if it's come into contact with pesticides or fertilizers. It's just not a good idea. If you have a young bearded dragon, you're going to be going through a lot of insects, so you want to make sure that you have an insect supplier on hand, because like one day you might go to the pet store and there might be no more insects there, or one day you might go online to the place that you buy your insects from and there might not be any of those type there. So make sure you have a few different places to get insects from that you're aware of. That way you don't ever run out. If you have an adult bearded dragon, feeding them is not going to be as much of a challenge because the insects will be less than when they're young, because I'm telling you, when they're young they go through insects, but as adults they don't really. So it'll be an easier time for you to find insects, but just be prepared for how many insects they're going to eat when they're juveniles, because you're going to have to buy a lot of them. What I recommend having is a dubia colony. If you only have one reptile, it might not be as worthwhile, although you can sell the dubia roaches to people like on Craigslist or online, and people will buy them, so you can make a little profit off of it. But Having a tuberose colony is amazing because you can just know that your dubias don't have parasites, that they are well taken care of, that they have been properly gut loaded, and then you can just literally just, oh, I need some food, go to the closet. Oh, time to feed the dragons. Take them downstairs. Like, it's that easy. I purchased my other insects, like my hornworms or my superworms, through Josh's Frogs. So if you're interested, you can check out them, but there's tons of places online to get insects from. There's people who will feed mice their bearded dragons. I just feed mine insects personally. So leafy greens are the vegetable staple for your bearded dragons. They are super important to the diet of a bearded dragon, especially adult bearded dragons. So make sure you know where to get organic leafy greens from, and make sure you can find a variety of them because variety is best. This video is not going to give you a complete list of all of the greens that are safe for your bearded dragon to eat. I'm going to list the ones that I feed my bearded dragons, and it's kind of a long list because I like to offer a variety. So I'm just going to read right off of here and put some B-roll footage. Here we go. So I offer turnip greens, collard greens, mustard greens, dandelion greens, escarole, endive, and watercress. It's really important to offer a variety when it comes to leafy greens because they all have something different to offer. If you're feeding the same one all the time, you might have a bearded dragon that's lacking in what other greens might offer. Plus, there's also greens that are have a calcium to phosphorus ratio that's better or worse than others. And so if you're offering one that's on the worse end every single time, then your bearded dragon is going to be lacking in the calcium they could get from greens that have a higher calcium to phosphorus ratio. So what do I mean when I say calcium to phosphorus ratio? So basically, if a food item, could be insect, could be green, if it has high phosphorus, it's going to detract from the amount of calcium that your animal can absorb from it. So if it's really great in calcium, but it's also right up here with phosphorus, it's gonna detract from how much calcium your bearded dragon can take in. Does that make sense? So a lot of insects have a negative calcium to phosphorus ratio, and that's why we have to dust them with calcium. Trust me, I'm gonna get to that. I didn't just skip over it for no reason. It's gonna be the next subject I cover in supplementation. Because greens have different levels of calcium to phosphorus ratios, it's a good idea to offer a variety. That way you're making sure that your bearded dragon is well covered when it comes to calcium. There's also something in greens called oxalates that's going to inhibit your bearded dragon's ability to absorb calcium, and there's a few greens that are higher in oxalates. I'm going to read them off right now. There's spinach, beet greens, Swiss chard, parsley, and kale. Those are okay to offer on occasion, however, they do have the higher oxalates, so it's a good idea to offer them in moderation. So for greens, you want to offer those every day, except maybe 1 or 2 days a week. So you'll offer them 5 times a week. You can skip the day that you're offering insects to your bearded dragon when it comes to salad, so you can just have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday you'll skip greens, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday you'll skip greens and you'll offer insects. Or you can do it so that you have insects, and then the day after you feed insects, there's no greens or insects, and it's just a digestion day. It's totally up to you. But people offer greens every day. Well, some people do. Some people offer them 5 times a week, and some people choose to offer them 6 times a week. Really, it's going to be up to you and your bearded dragon. If you're having issues with your bearded dragon's weight, you can cut down on the amount of protein and greens that they eat. It's going to be totally up to you. I say I offer greens probably 5 to 6 times a week. You can also offer vegetables to your bearded dragons. I'm not going to include a full list of the safe vegetables and fruits, but there are tons of resources out there, and I will include some down in the links below. It's just to save time because this has already been over 2 hours and I have other stuff to do today, so I'm going to include a list of all of the safe fruits and vegetables down below. However, I do want to mention that you don't want your bearded dragon's diet to be predominantly vegetables and fruits compared to greens. You want it to be greens, vegetables, fruits. You don't really want to offer that many fruits. It's really just a treat. Now, when it comes to offering vegetables, a lot of people will offer big complex salads a couple times a week. This might lend to digestive issues or to having obesity in your bearded dragon. I only offer chopped up veggies with their greens once or twice a month, and I only offer them fruits once a month or less. And ever since Franklin's been having digestive issues due to his tumor, I don't offer him any, but we'll get to that at the end of this video. You just want to be careful what you're offering too, because you don't want to offer too many of one type of vegetable. You want to offer a variety. If you're noticing that your bearded dragon is better about eating their greens when there's other stuff mixed in, that's a good way to get them to start eating their greens, but you don't want them to eat those type of veggies chopped up like every single day with their greens. Really, their plate or their bowl should look like a lot of greens and maybe a couple veggies here and there. I'm gonna go through a short list of things you can offer, but again, this is not a complete list and I will leave a resource for that down below. But you can offer chopped bell pepper, peeled and chopped squash, sweet potato, pumpkin, carrots, peas, and broccoli. For fruits, you can offer blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, banana, honeydew, cantaloupe. Never feed tomatoes, avocado, lettuce, rhubarb, celery, or citrus fruit. If you're not sure if it's safe for your bearded dragon, Google is literally a fingertip away. Like, you can just find exactly online, can my bearded dragon eat parsley? Can my bearded dragon eat peas? And it will come up with resources to tell you if they can or can't. It's always okay, even 5-10 years into keeping a reptile, to do a double check. So to know how much to feed your bearded dragon is going to depend on what you're offering and how old your bearded dragon is. So a juvenile can eat once a day. You can feed them as many insects as they'll consume in like a 5-minute period. You can also offer them a salad, and if you want to encourage them to eat this salad, you can put their insects on the greens, and then they might accidentally eat some of the greens while they're eating the bugs. It's just a good way for them to get their greens in and for you to train them to start eating greens while they're young. Adult bearded dragons, you can feed them like 5 or 6 times a week greens, and then you'll feed them the insects once a week. The amount of insects that you'll feed your bearded dragon, I typically only ever feed like 4 or 5 of the big dubia roaches to them at a time. However, they would eat more if they could, so keep that in mind. When it comes to greens, I just offer a little ceramic dish of greens. You've probably seen it on the screen with the B-roll footage at some point in time, but it's just like a little like handful of chopped greens, and then I just put it in that bowl, and they can nibble at it throughout the day. A lot of times they'll eat all of it right then and there, but sometimes they'll revisit it and like eat half of it at one point in time and then half later. If you're having trouble getting your bearded dragon to eat their greens, you can use the tip I recommended by putting insects on the greens, because then they might try to eat the insects and then therefore they'll get the greens. But you can also try switching it up. They might just not like the greens that you're offering. You could also try putting bee pollen powder on the greens. Sometimes that can make it more appetizing for them. It's also quite nutritious. So those are some tips. If you're still having trouble, try moving the green around with your hand like it's an insect and trying to get them interested that way. If you know that there is a vegetable or a fruit that they'll eat, like put the smell of it on the greens, or like put a little bit on the tip of the green so that when they go to bite what they think is their favorite fruit or veggie, they're also getting a green. Just make sure they're getting their greens. So now let's talk about supplementation. Like all reptiles, bearded dragons need to have supplements added to their diet to make sure that they are at proper levels of calcium, D3, and other vitamins. So when you are offering insects to your bearded dragon, you need to dose them in calcium. This is because a lot of insects have a negative instead of positive calcium to phosphorus ratio, like we discussed earlier. So if the insect's phosphorus is too high, it's going to inhibit the bearded dragon's ability to absorb the calcium coming from the insect. So how do we fix that? We put calcium on the insect. That way, calcium, phosphorus. Make sense? So basically what you're going to want to do every single time you offer insects is dust them with calcium. Now, if you're offering a quality UVB bowl, which you should be for bearded dragons, you won't have to offer D3 as often as you would for like an animal you're not offering UVB to, like maybe a leopard gecko. The way UVB works is that when your bearded dragon basks under the UVB, they create their own D3 in their body that helps them metabolize and absorb the calcium. So when your bearded dragon eats a leafy green or eats an insect dusted in calcium, it gets that calcium intake. The UVB helps them produce D3 in their body, which is necessary for the absorption of calcium. You have to have both elements, calcium and D3. So make sure you're offering calcium in the diet. Make sure you're offering D3 in the form of UVB and in the diet. We offer D3 as a supplement just to make sure that they're getting enough D3 in their bodies, because we are not offering them natural sunlight. We're offering them UVB through a bulb, which is like artificial sunlight. We're trying our best to replicate their natural environment. So because we are offering our bearded dragons UVB, we don't have to offer D3 every single time we offer calcium. But essentially, when you're dusting your insects, or if you're putting calcium on your salad, which is something that a lot of people do, what you can do is just put plain calcium on the insect, or you could put plain calcium plus D3 and multivitamin. The calcium supplements that I use are plain calcium carbonate, which is like in a big jar I get offline. Again, that's in my Amazon affiliate shop down below. or I'll use Repashy Calcium Plus, which is calcium plus D3 and a multivitamin. Now, because that has multivitamin and D3, I do not use that every time. I rotate it out and I use the calcium, the plain calcium, more often. And again, like I referenced earlier, Franklin's bones are top notch on an x-ray, so what I'm doing is working for me. Arcadia also has really awesome supplements. I have not been able to get a hold of them yet because every time I go to order them, they go out of stock really fast. So if you are interested in trying Arcadia supplements, that's available for you. Not all supplements are made the same. While Repashy Calcium Plus has been my tried and true for years and years, it is a good idea to try other types of supplements and do like a switcheroo, you know, have some variety in the supplements that you offer to make sure that your bearded dragon is being covered on all the bases. So now let's talk about water intake. So bearded dragons don't readily drink water from a bowl because they are evolutionarily predisposed against drinking water that's stagnant, that doesn't have any movement on its surface. And so unless you have like a bubbler in your enclosure, which I don't know if you can do because it might increase the humidity too much, or any sort of like moving water feature in your enclosure, they might not drink water. So a lot of people opt against having a bowl of water in their enclosure and rather just let them get water from their greens and also give them baths like maybe once or twice a month that allow them to drink water through their mouth. But bearded dragons don't need like as much water as a human being would. So sometimes I'll see someone comment like, oh my god, my bearded dragon or my leopard gecko or whatever reptile isn't drinking water. And I'm like, they don't really drink water like we do. Like they don't just sit there and enjoy a glass of water. You know, they're just getting it mostly from the food that they eat. Sometimes they'll occasionally drink out of a water dish, that's true. But for the most part, they're gonna get their moisture from the food they eat. Now, if you opt to give your bearded dragon baths, you might notice your bearded dragon lower their head into the water. They'll open their mouth just a tiny little bit and then you'll notice them sucking water in through the sides with like their lips moving. It's actually kind of cool. But some people don't bathe their bearded dragons. Again, that's going to be a personal choice up to you. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that might be a time in which your bearded dragon hydrates itself. Now let's talk about their well-being. So first we'll talk about cleanliness. Bearded dragons are not very tidy reptiles simply for the fact that they have gigantic, massive, stinky poops. And we'll talk about their poops more later, like I keep saying. But in addition to being like massive poopers, they also have a tendency to like run around with poop like on their feet and spread it around the enclosure. Or they might knock things over in their enclosure because they're very rowdy and big reptiles. So like you might have to redecorate their enclosure once a day or a couple times a week. You also might have to scrub poop off of them, which we'll get to when we talk about bathing. But like as far as reptiles go, they're not the cleanest, but I imagine it's probably more of a challenge for people who have like really big snakes because their poops, I heard, are just But all bearded dragons are different. Franklin has notoriously been messier than Nova, although as Nova gets older, I think she's like, we can make a contest out of this. And now she's trying to be messy too. So now let's talk about bathing. So if your bearded dragon has a tendency to get poop all over itself, or if you just want to give your bearded dragon a bath because they're about to shed, or if you want to give your bearded dragon a bath because you want to give them a moment to hydrate, whatever your reasoning is, I think a bath is completely fine for a bearded dragon. I think once a week or less is fine. I typically do about like 2 to maybe 3 times a month, although more likely 2. But basically, I just take my bearded dragon in there, let them soak. Sometimes this will encourage them to poop if they haven't pooped yet that day, but if you're needing to rely on baths for your bearded dragon to poop, your temperatures are probably too low and you need to make them higher in your enclosure. But more on that later. We'll talk about digestive issues later. So a bath can be really helpful for keeping your bearded dragon clean. If you want to get some poop off your bearded dragon's scales, you can take a toothbrush. I don't recommend using one that like you've used in your mouth. Just get like a toothbrush, you know, that's like, buy a new one that's just for your reptiles. Get the toothbrush and go the direction of the scales. You don't want to go against the scales, you want to go down the scales. You don't need to use any soaps or anything like that for bearded dragons. You just need to use warm water, and by warm I mean no hotter than 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It's gonna feel kind of cold to us because our body temperature is hotter, but bearded dragons are cold-blooded because they're reptiles, so you don't want to offer water that's too hot. But yeah, basically let them soak, use the toothbrush and go the direction of their scales to get the poop off if they have poop on them. If they don't have poop and they're just like about to shed and you just want to make sure they have some moisture, just let them soak in the water, give it about 15-20 minutes and then take them out, let them dry, put them back in their enclosure. Also, some bearded dragons are not fond of baths. It's okay if yours doesn't want to have a bath, that's completely fine. If your bearded dragon is messy but they don't love baths, you can just hold them underneath of water instead of putting them in water. Never make the water deep enough that your bearded dragon has to swim. Like, it should never be above their chest. Like, they should be able to comfortably like rest with their head above the water. Now, when it comes to other types of hygiene aspects, there are nail trims and then teeth brushing. Now, teeth brushing is a controversial thing. I only started doing it because Nova had a health issue, and then the vet was like, try this and see if that helps her. So Nova had irritated gums. She kept holding her mouth open like a tiny bit, and I was worried, like, why is she doing that? I brought her to the vet, and the vet was like, oh, she has irritated gums for whatever reason, even though she had the same diet as Franklin and her diet hadn't changed, and all of a sudden her gums were irritated. We don't know why, but I basically took a chlorhexidine solution mixed with water. It was a 50-50 mixture. I put it on a Q-tip, I rubbed it along her gum line, the issue went away. And so about once a month, maybe twice a month, I'll do this to both Franklin and Nova just to keep their teeth and gums healthy, because bearded dragons are susceptible to having basically rot in their mouth, or they are susceptible to having a situation in which like their gum line recedes and then the bone is exposed, and that becomes really dangerous. So there's something my vet recommended. Again, it's not something that everyone thinks is okay. It's kind of controversial. I've seen people talk about it on Twitter and Facebook where they're like, oh my god, why would someone ever brush their bearded dragon's teeth? They're not a dog. I get it. That's completely fine, and you are entitled to your opinion. I personally do it because it was recommended by my vet. I haven't had any issues since doing it, and it's been since 2019 that I've been doing it. Again, I just use chlorhexidine mixed with water. It's a 50-50 combo, and then I put it on a Q-tip and I rub it on the inside of their like gum line. Like, I lift their lip, put it along their teeth and their gum line. I don't like rub the bottom of their teeth like we would. I just do it along their gum line. I do it a couple swipes, and then that's it, top and bottom, and I'm done. If that's something that you want to do, you have to be really comfortable with your bearded dragon, because you're going to be putting your hands in their mouth. So if you feel at all like your bearded dragon might bite you, you know, I don't recommend, but it's just something you can consult your vet about it if you're curious. Again, it's a controversial topic, and we're moving on. Next up is nail trims, which is also kind of controversial, but I don't understand why. Some bearded dragons are just not great at filing down their own nails. I get it if like your enclosure isn't enriching, and that's why it's controversial, because someone's not offering enough like decor in the enclosure that's like wood or rock for the nails to naturally be grinded down on. I've never had an issue with Franklin. No matter what type of enclosure I kept him in, his nails were always trim. But Nova's, whether she's in a more like minimalistic setup or whether she's in a naturalistic with rock and tile and slate and substrate and all kinds of wood, right? Still, her nails are too long, and I'll have to trim them and file them. So basically what I do is I just take a little nail file and I just that's it, just a nice little file just to get them a little bit shorter. She actually had a nail pulled out once because her nails were too long. So I really don't recommend doing nothing about long nails. Don't worry, the nail, it didn't even bleed or anything, just popped right off and now it's growing back in. It was very weird. She did it without me knowing too. Like, I went to bed one day, she had 5 nails on one hand. I came downstairs the next day, she had 4 nails on one hand. It was on her little like pointer finger. It just happens sometimes with rowdy bearded dragons, or when they're moving around, their nail could get like broken or clipped or torn off in something, and so she must have just done that in the enclosure. It's only happened the one time, and I couldn't figure out where her nail went. There's the end of that story. But to avoid that, you should be trimming their nails or offering a lot of decor in the enclosure that allows them to file their nails down on. You don't want to trim the nails too short either. Bearded dragons, like dogs, will have a little nerve inside their nail, and you do not want to file to that point. A lot of times you can see where that is in their nail because their nails are see-through. So just file the very tip. You don't need to go too short, right? If you go too short, it can actually hit that nerve and they can bleed. Now, when it comes to shedding, bearded dragons shed throughout their lives. They'll shed more when they're growing, so like juveniles, or when they've put on weight after being rescued, or, you know, if they're a bearded dragon that just laid a bunch of eggs and now they're putting on a bunch of weight again, they might shed more. Bearded dragons don't usually shed all their body at one time or in one piece. They shed in like little flaky chunks. Sometimes they'll start with their head and their legs. Sometimes it'll be their tail and their underside. Sometimes it'll just be their back. Sometimes it'll just be one hand. Like, they just kind of decide to shed all randomly in like a patchwork, and that's okay. That's completely normal. Your bearded dragon, when it's starting to shed, will become really dull. Like, they will just look like a lighter color of themselves, almost like there's a film over their original color. After a few days or maybe even a week, the shed will start to peel up at the edges. It's important that you don't peel it off unless it's fallen off already. Like if you notice a piece of shed that's just like away from their body, you can pull it off then, but it's important that you don't peel their shed for them. That can be very harmful and also very hurtful to them. So make sure that you just let them shed on their own, unless it's like around their eyes. Then like if they have a piece hanging off their eye, you can help them get that, but that's just to prevent any irritation for them. I know it can be kind of fun, right, to pick and peel, but that is not for us to do, it is for them to do. If you give them a bath and the shed just starts floating off in the bath, it's okay to do a nice gentle brush down the length of their scales or down the direction their scales are going with a toothbrush to help them just get a little bit of the itchiness out, because I know that they're itchy because my bearded dragons, when they're in shed, can be a little bit more testy than usual. All right, bearded dragon poop. Ugh. I've been saying it the whole time. Bearded dragon poop is foul. It's disgusting. It stinks really bad and it's really big, and also lots of moisture. And when your bearded dragons poop, you can hear it. I'll be eating a sandwich in the kitchen and I'll hear the noise, like the squelching sound of my bearded dragon pooping, and I'm like, delicious. Eating my sandwich, bearded dragon has pooped, and then of course I finish my sandwich and then go clean up her poop. But it's definitely something that you can hear, you can see it, you can smell it. It offends all the senses, okay? Healthy poop should have a large brown portion, a smaller white portion. The white part is urate and the brown part is poop or waste, like from food. Bearded dragons also have like different schedules for pooping. So like some bearded dragons will poop like every single day. Some will poop every other day. Some will poop a couple times a week. It's gonna be up to you to discern whether or not your bearded dragon is having digestive issues, because if your bearded dragon has always been a beardie that has pooped every day and then suddenly it's only pooping once a week, that's cause for concern. But if your bearded dragon has always been a bearded dragon who poops like a couple times a week and then one day they just only poop like once a week, that sounds pretty normal. They're allowed to have fluctuations in how much they poop or in the size of their poop, but they should be pooping. If your bearded dragon is going days and days and days or weeks and weeks and it's not pooping, that is cause for concern. If your bearded dragon is not pooping, it could be constipated, it could be dehydrated, it could be impacted. Make sure that you're providing proper temperatures, because a proper heat is what's going to allow your bearded dragon to digest food and pass it out. So if your bearded dragon is having proper heat, the next thing you can do is offer a warm bath. That might facilitate a poop. You can also offer pumpkin, which helps them move the poop through their body. I've also seen people offer applesauce with a drop of olive oil to help them get a poop going, but that is just like a simple fix. If your bearded dragon is consistently having pooping problems, take them to the vet. The poop itself, if it's not uniform in shape, like if it's not like a log of brown and then like a white bit, you know, if that's not what it looks like, then it could be that your bearded dragon's poop is like diarrhea. So what diarrhea looks like in a bearded dragon is like there will be no uniform shape to the poop and it will be like extra watery. Franklin had so much diarrhea in the past because of having his gastrointestinal tumor, which we'll talk about later, but I have seen more diarrhea from a bearded dragon than I've ever needed to see in my whole life. So trust me when I tell you what it looks like. It just basically looks like a pile. Instead of being like a poop log with some moisture that comes out with the poop log, it's like nasty. It's just like a pile of poop with some urates mixed in and some moisture mixed in. It's like poop soup. When your bearded dragon is having poop like that, call your vet. If your bearded dragon is having poop that's really dry, or like the urates instead of being moist are really chalky, call your vet. If the urates aren't white and it's like multiple poops in a row, call your vet. If there's blood in the poop, call your vet. So now let's talk about a bearded dragon's proper weight and size. An adult bearded dragon will be anywhere from 14 to 24 inches long. However, a bearded dragon can also be stunted from improper diet, improper husbandry, bad UVB, metabolic bone disease, muscular dystrophy, having been like stepped on or having a bone broken when they were younger. Like there's a lot of things that can stunt a bearded dragon's growth, and so you might have a bearded dragon that's full grown that doesn't meet the 14 to 24 inches requirement. Although 14 inches is quite a small bearded dragon, although I've seen smaller. So if you have a bearded dragon that is stunted for whatever reason, it's still full grown, it's just never going to be a big dragon, it's a little dragon. Bearded dragons will vary in weight just as much as they will vary in size. A smaller this way, so less inches, shorter, that's what I'm looking for. A shorter bearded dragon can be about like 300 grams, whereas a larger or longer bearded dragon can be like 600 grams. Now, I hesitate to be like, this is the exact weight that a bearded dragon should be, because they vary so much in size and because what's healthy on one dragon is not going to be healthy on another. So just look at your own dragon, look at its body proportions, ask your vet, is it an appropriate size or is it too big or too small? Look at your dragon in comparison to other dragons that are similar body shapes and similar lengths, and look at the weight that way. A severely underweight bearded dragon will have bones showing, it will have a sunken in head, it will just have a really skinny tail. Like, you'll be able to tell when a bearded dragon is too skinny. A really obese bearded dragon will have a really wide body, it'll have a really thick like neck gullet, it'll have a really thick tail, and their limbs will be really stout. So just aim for the middle of that, and keep in mind that all bearded dragons are different. Now we're on to common health issues. So I'm just going to go down a list of them and tell you what the symptoms look like, and then at the end I'm gonna say, here's a bunch of symptoms of illness to look for, and when you notice these, go to the vet and you can receive a diagnosis like this. So one would be a respiratory infection, which can be caused by too much humidity or too cold of an enclosure or too dirty of an environment. A respiratory infection, what looks like in a bearded dragon, would be a gaping mouth because they're trying to get more air in. They'll have like bubbles in their spit, a lot of spit, and they'll have like a clicking noise when they're breathing. They may have lethargy, lack of appetite, they may look dull in color, and they may have moisture or something coming from their nose and their mouth. A respiratory infection has to be treated with antibiotics, and that requires a vet visit because you have to get them from the vet. And it'll be an injection. Metabolic bone disease, super common in bearded dragons. It's where they don't have enough calcium intake, so their body is taking calcium from their bones. As a result, their bones will often break and become misshapen. A lot worse happens than just their bones, like it affects their entire body, their ability to function, and it is an irreversible thing. So even if you offer calcium and supplementation to correct the problem, their bones will never reshapen, and it can give them lifelong problems that even once they're having calcium again, they may never be able to live a normal life, and there's a gecko, and you might have to consistently take them to the vet for like extra assessment compared to a bearded dragon that never had metabolic bone disease. But yeah, it can cause bone issues, it can cause neurological issues, it can cause digestive issues, it can cause problems with vision, problems with movement. I mean, calcium is so very vital to your bearded dragon or to any reptile's health that metabolic bone disease is normally seen as just like a bending of the limbs, but it impacts way more than just their limbs. Number 3 is mites. Mites are little nasties, little black nasties that live in between the scales of your bearded dragon. A lot of times it'll be that they come from other reptiles, or you brought them home like from an expo that you were at, or they came in the bedding that the bearded dragon has, and they're not easy to get rid of. Basically, you'll have to deep clean the entire enclosure, no substrate, you'll have to change the paper towel every day, you'll have to treat your bearded dragon for mites, you'll have to throw out anything that can't properly be cleaned, so like I don't know, like the bedding, the wood, anything like that. It's a real headache to get rid of these parasites, but you have to. You'll notice them if you put your bearded dragon in water and there's like black flecks that are floating to the surface. That's the mites. Do not mistake this for dirt, okay? Look in between your bearded dragon's scales, and if you see little black mites stuck in between their scales, that's mites. But dirt also floats to the surface. Poop flecks also float to the surface, so don't panic. Just assess the situation, do some research about mites, and then figure out if that's the issue. Plus, you can always consult your vet, and your vet can tell you if they're mites or not. Your vet will also be able to give you a mite treatment plan, and that is good because I've never had to treat mites and I never want to. Now, your bearded dragon may look lethargic because the mites are literally sucking the life out of it. Your bearded dragon might look itchy, like you might notice them scratching themselves against things. That's an indicator that they have mites. Again, to the vet. Go to the vet. To the vet. They'll treat them. In addition to having external parasites, bearded dragons can also have internal parasites, although there's tons of different kinds of parasites they can have. You'll often notice this because it will impact their poop. It'll impact their diet. It'll impact their, like, whether they have lethargy or not. And so if they lose weight, all of that can come from parasites. Your vet will ask you to bring in a poop so that a fecal can be done. The poop has to be no older than 24 hours, and you had to have like picked it up and put it in the fridge. So like as soon as you notice the poop and you know you're gonna bring it into your vet, put it in a baggie, put it in the fridge. Bring it to your vet within 24 hours from when the poop was laid. okay, and then have your vet do the fecal. They'll be able to see any parasites or any abnormalities in the poop and tell you if your bearded dragon has parasites. It's not a bad idea to get a fecal done on your bearded dragon, even if they're completely healthy, because they might have parasites, and then all it takes is for your bearded dragon to have cold temperatures or a small poor health event to make parasites become a problem. Parasites often come from all kinds of things. They can come from another bearded dragon, they can come from food, they can come from like poop. Bearded dragon poop spread to another bearded dragon. Parasites can be passed pretty easily, so just keep that in mind. There's also adenovirus, which I've also seen called adenovirus, but basically it is a virus in bearded dragons that, if contracted when they're a baby and they live to adulthood, they'll probably live a relatively normal life up until the end of their life, and then the adenovirus symptoms will begin to show. A lot of times it's neurological. But if a baby has adenovirus and it's like born from its mother with adenovirus, it's very possible that it will just die when it's young. It's really hard to say because there are bearded dragons who live to adulthood with it, but it is a fatal condition. It is not something that you can treat or heal. It's also called wasting disease or stargazing disease, and like I said, it's neurological, and that's what the stargazing is for, because stargazing is a neurological symptom. Another one is called yellow fungus. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's a fungus that grows on a bearded dragon's body that's yellow. And the cause is not super well known. It's still being researched. A lot of times people think it comes from like a combination of dirty enclosure and like poor husbandry, or like the bearded dragon is susceptible to illness and therefore the yellow virus kind of takes over, or the yellow fungus, takes over. The thing about yellow virus is that once you notice it, you have to get to a vet immediately. It can be very hard to stop the progression of yellow virus, and it will progress fast. In addition to being on the surface of the bearded dragon, the longer that your bearded dragon has yellow virus, it can spread to their deep tissues and their organs, and at that point it is fatal. It's not something that they can come back from. It can also spread from one dragon to another, so keep that in mind. The next one is muscular dystrophy. It will look like metabolic bone disease, but it is not metabolic bone disease, and muscular dystrophy is becoming a lot more common in bearded dragons. I can't say I'm an expert on it, I really can't. There is a person that you can check out. The account on Instagram is SW Sutherlands, and they are a bearded dragon rescue, and they have worked with bearded dragons who have muscular dystrophy, so they'd be a great resource to check out if your bearded dragon has that or if you're curious about it. Essentially, it's a genetic condition that causes a decrease in muscle mass, and so this results in the bearded dragon having difficulty with mobility, and that's why a lot of people think metabolic bone disease when they see it. One reason people think that it's becoming more common in bearded dragons nowadays is because our breeding pool has become like smaller and smaller, and a lot of inbreeding has occurred. Another one is mouth rot, which is an infection in the mouth. It can occur from poor husbandry, it can occur from like dirty conditions, it can occur from like an injury in the mouth that becomes infected. Generally, mouth rot occurs just from husbandry being lacking, so the temperatures are too cold or the environment is too dirty. When they open their mouths, you'll notice like sores or redness, you'll notice like fuzzy growth, or you'll notice blackness. It'll just be an abnormality that does not look good, and it can often cause your bearded dragon to not eat, or they can hold their mouth open because their mouth is sore, or they can lose weight because they're not eating, although you should probably notice before that happens. Regardless, your bearded dragon needs to see a vet because it needs to have antibiotics to clear up the issue. If you leave mouth rot untreated, it can be fatal. Another one is tail rot. This often occurs when an injury happens to the bearded dragon's tail. It could be from a bite, it could be from the tail breaking, it could be from something crushing the tail. And basically what happens is the tail tip is dead and no more blood is getting to that part of the tail, but it's still attached, and so infection can begin there and spread to the rest of the tail. And the term rot is because the tail will rot from the tip all the way up the body. It's really important when your bearded dragon has a tail injury, if the tail tip is no longer viable, to take it to the vet and have the tail tip removed. That way rot cannot spread to the rest of the tail. It's actually pretty common for bearded dragons to have nipped tails or to have like broken tail tips because their tails are so long, and sometimes things just fall on their tails or the tail tips break. But make sure that when it happens, you take the dragon to the vet so that they can assess the tail, and if it's a break that could cause infection, they'll be able to remove it. Another one I want to cover is gastrointestinal tumor, which basically is what my bearded dragon Franklin has, and it caused him to have diarrhea. We treated that with antibiotics, and then he had vegetables one day and then he puked for like 4 days straight every single time he ate. And so we did a barium test, which is where he had to swallow barium at the vet. They kept him there for a couple days. Oh, he came home with me at night, but then I had to bring him back the next day. But he had barium tests for 3 days as this barium moved through his body. X-rays were taken. That's how I know he has good bones, because I saw him on the X-rays. But his X-rays were taken, and to see like how food moved down his gastrointestinal tract. That X-ray, or that barium test, combined with his rising glucose levels of his blood, because he had blood taken in December and then again in like March, and he had a higher glucose level in March than he did in December. He also had a bit of weight loss. So all those factors led us to diagnose him with gastrointestinal tumor, which there's nothing to do about. So we just have to make him comfortable and hope that he's able to live a long time with it. Apparently it's not super uncommon in bearded dragons, so I figured I would share that here. So I'm going to read off of this some signs of compromised health. Include but are not limited to sunken eyes, wrinkled skin, lethargy, paleness or dullness, paralysis, lack of appetite, drooling, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, bloating, and scratching, like if they're scratching their body against the decor in their enclosure. Now we're on to the last section, which is reproductive health. So bearded dragons reach sexual maturity between 8 and 18 months of age. With or without the presence of a male, a female can lay infertile eggs. If there's a male present, they're probably fertile. If there's no male present, then she'd lay infertile eggs. You might also never have your bearded dragon lay eggs. My bearded dragon Nova has never laid eggs, and I've had her for years. I'm hoping she never does. I don't want to have to deal with it. I don't plan to breed her. I'm not a breeder, so her laying eggs would be completely pointless for me. Speaking of not being a breeder, I'm not going to cover anything about egg care or anything like that because I'm not a breeder and don't have any experience with that. This video is for pet keepers. I'm sure breeders could find this a good resource as well, but it's not going to cover breeding. So how to know if your bearded dragon is carrying eggs. Her belly will be fuller. You can also feel the eggs on her underside. Like if you're palpating her underside, you can feel the eggs. She might also start to get agitated, restless. She might start to dig a lot. That's an indication she's getting ready to lay her eggs. Make sure that she has dirt or vermiculite or sand dirt mixture or sand, something that's a moist substrate she can dig into that's multiple inches deep in an area of the enclosure that's like closed off. It can be like a little box or a hide or a Tupperware container with a hole cut in it, big enough for her whole body to fit into, and you're going to want to put it more towards the warm side than the cool side. She won't lay the eggs on the cool side. From what I've understood, they can become egg bound if they feel that where you've put their lay box is too cold. So make sure you just put it towards the warm end of the enclosure. She could lay anywhere from just a few eggs to 20 eggs or more, which is going to be very taxing on your female bearded dragon. So make sure that when she's done laying, you offer her fatty insects with calcium. She's going to need protein, she's going to need fat, she's going to need calcium. She needs those three to start recuperating how much effort it took for her body to make those eggs. If you are not offering enough calcium, they can become egg bound. If they lay one clutch and then they are preparing to make another but there's not enough calcium, they can still become egg bound. It's really important to offer like a really good amount of calcium to your bearded dragon when they're laying eggs because it takes so much calcium to make those eggs. If she's retaining the eggs, she won't lay them. Consult a vet. If you notice that she's seeming really lethargic and just is not herself, take her to a vet. It's really not a bad idea to have a vet as a resource. If you're not used to your bearded dragon laying eggs, it's definitely something I would do because I've never had to experience it. Male bearded dragons get grouchy during breeding season. That's really the only behavioral change they have. However, they also can have clogged femoral pores. So basically, they will secrete a waxy substance from their femoral pores, and if they are unable to naturally get out this secretion, they can become built up in their pores. The pores will become really blocky, really wide, really sore and reddened, and the only way to properly take out these femoral pore blocks, especially if you're not used to this, is to take them to a vet. I've seen people pop bearded dragon femoral pores or pick them like they're human acne. I don't recommend doing this. There's a lot that goes into making sure that you clean the area safely. So I really recommend having a vet do it at least the first time. And then if your bearded dragon has the problem again, then you're well equipped after seeing what your vet did to try it out yourself. But it's also not a bad idea to consult your vet about it because when you take the plugs out, which is also not a comfortable time for your bearded dragon, You should always soak them first, by the way, because it softens the area. But when you take the plugs out, they'll have open, exposed femoral pores, and it's important that nothing gets in them, no infection sets in, that they can close up on their own over the next few days. To avoid your bearded dragon having clogged femoral pores, I recommend like bathing maybe once or twice a month because it helps soften up the pore area. Also, I recommend giving your bearded dragon stuff to rub their femoral pores on, so that could be rock, slate, cork, anything that has a texture to it that your bearded dragon can scrape out like the secretions from. It can happen regardless if you offer that or not. Some bearded dragons are predisposed to those issues, so it's just something to keep your eye on. That's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this informational and insightful. If you did, please let me know by leaving a like, a comment, subscribe, and notification bell. Let me know by becoming part of this channel. Also, please check out the links below for merch, for Teespring, well, that's merch, just kidding, for Patreon, for affiliate links, for all kinds of stuff. I will leave tons of information down below for you guys to access. I thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!